Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Beis, Daf 42 of Masechta Pesachim. So, of course, we finished the second perek today, which is exciting. But before we do that, we discuss eating the Korban Pesach roasted before Pesach begins. What do you guys think? Allowed, not allowed, encouraged, discouraged? What do you say? Should we open up a poll? Then we get to the new perek, and then all sorts of not allowed Hametz, like mixtures. We'll see. Beer. Can you drink beer? What do you guys think? Can you drink beer on Pesach? And what if you do drink beer? Here we go. We're going to start on Daf Mem Aleph from the base, about 6 lines from the bottom, 7, 8. Tanu about an achol tzli tzali mi'ba'od yom. If a person eats Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach, before Pesach begins, and it is roasted, as it should be, but you shouldn't be eating it then. Chayiv. So then he is Chayiv Malchus. He gets lashes. He's over on a lav. Chayiv. And if he eats a kezayis of Korban Pesach that is rare at night, like on Pesach, so then, of course, he is Chayiv for lashes. He gets lashes as well. Now, katani tzali dum yadina. So now this brisa teaches eating roasted Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. It's juxtaposing it with eating rare Korban Pesach at night on Pesach. Mano bilav af tzali bilav. And therefore, just like eating a rare Korban Pesach at night, you are violating a Torah prohibition, and therefore you have gotten yourself some lashes. Very good. And so the same thing would apply if you eat the roasted Korban Pesach before Pesach begins. You have gotten yourself some lashes. Good job. Bishlama, no. So the Gemara says, I understand why you would get lashes for eating a rare Korban Pesach at night. Well, it says explicitly in the pasuk, don't eat it rare, and you ate it rare, so we lash you. Ella tzali minalan. But how do I know that I'm also not allowed to eat roasted Korban Pesach before Pesach begins? And if I do, then I get whipped. So minalan dichsev, as the pasuk says, v'achlu sabasu balayla hazeh. Well, you got to eat the meat at night. Balayla in bayom lo. You eat the meat at night. You don't eat the meat during the day. And if you eat the meat during the day, we're going to whip you. Halav b'michlal aseyu. V'cholav b'michlal asey. Oh, but the Gemara asks a kasha. So the pasuk doesn't explicitly say, do not eat the Korban Pesach during the day. What it says is eat the Korban Pesach at night, which therefore implies don't eat it during the day. But it doesn't explicitly say do not eat the Korban Pesach during the day, and therefore it's what's called a lava ba michlal aseh. It is a prohibition that only comes from the inference of what you should do, right? We say eat the Korban Pesach at night, which therefore implies don't eat it during the day. But it doesn't explicitly say don't eat it during the day. So it's a prohibition that is coming from the implication of what you should do. It therefore implies don't do X, but it doesn't explicitly say that. So v'lchol lav abba michlal aseh aseh. And any prohibition that is learnt out from the implication of what you should do, right? So we're saying eat the meat at night, implication being don't eat it during the day. Well, it's just treated as an aseh, as a positive commandment. Now, we don't lash you for not doing a positive commandment. You don't get the reward, but we don't punish you per se. And therefore, eating the Korban Pesach during the day should be treated as though I messed up with a mitzvah aseh, but, we shouldn't have to whip you for that. So, Amar Rav Chizda Hamani Rabbi Yehuda. So, Rav Chizda says that the one who is saying that we're going to whip you for eating the Korban Pesach that's roasted before Pesach, meaning if you eat it before Pesach, so we whip you. So that is Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, how come? Titania, as we learn in the Brisa, Shor v'ses arov v'kalut nedava taisa also. Okay, so the pasuk says that if you have an ox or a sheep that one limb is bigger than the other, or its hooves are not split, they're somehow connected. Nidavataisa also, so you can donate it to the Beis Hamikdash as a donation, but you can't offer it on the Mizbeach because it has a mum. It has a blemish. So now, also atamat bis levedek habayis. So an animal that has a blemish, you're allowed to donate to the temple. V'atamat bis tmim levedek habayis. But you do not donate healthy animals to the bedek habayis, right? Meaning, I guess healthy animals you offer as sacrifices, but you don't donate them to the Beis Hamikdash. Interesting. But the one, okay, no. So what do we see? So we say that. Right, from the fact, so let's go weiter. So from here they said, over ba'aseh. So therefore, from the implication of the fact that we specifically donate blemished animals to the Beis Hamikdash, but we don't donate, healthy, whole animals to the Beis Hamikdash. You bring them as korbanos, but don't donate them. So from here we say that anybody who does donate a unblemished animal to the temple treasury, over ba'aseh, he violates a positive commandment, the mitzvah aseh, ainli ela ba'aseh below ta'aseh minayin. Well, all I know then is that he violates a positive commandment, a mitzvah aseh. How do I know that actually by donating an unblemished animal to the Beis Hamikdash, you actually violate a prohibition? So Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, "Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor." In the context of this donation, it says, "Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor," that God said to Moshe lemor, and limed al, and let's go weiter for a second. Limed al kol parsha kula shei below taaseh divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, it teaches that this entire parsha of donating this animal to the temple treasury, if you were to mess up, i.e. if you were to donate an unblemished animal to the temple treasury, you would actually be violating a prohibition from the fact that it says lemor. So now, Amr lo Rebbe, the Bar Kapara, my mashma. So Rebbe says to Bar Kapara, do you understand this? How does lemor teach us that if you donate an unblemished animal to the Beis Hamikdash, you are violating a Torah prohibition and you'll get whipped? So Amrlo, so Bar Kapara responded to Rebbe, Dichsiv lemor lo ne'amar b'dvarim, that lemor actually is a abbreviation for lo ne'amar b'dvarim, that there is a lo ta'aseh involved in this. Be'Rav Amri, they said by the Beis Medrash of Rab, lemor lav amor, that there is a prohibition, a lav stated here, and therefore if it says lemor, it means that there's actually a Torah prohibition associated with this, and therefore also by Korban Pesach, where it says Vayomer Hashem Moshe v'Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. So in the context of Korban Pesach, it says lemor, implying that there is a mitzvah lo ta'aseh involved with it, and therefore if you eat the Korban Pesach during the day when it's not the proper time, you are violating a Torah prohibition, and we will whip you. Let's go weiter. So the Mishnah had said that the water that a baker uses, is like to soak his hands while, in the context of his work. So be careful, because that can make things rise. That can make things chametz, because he's got flour on his hands. He's touching the water, and the water can now become fermentatious. Tani chada shofchin b'makom madron. Okay, so one brisa says that if you have this baker water, so you have to spill it out in a place that's on an angle, on an incline or a decline, I guess, so that the water travels downwards and doesn't collect in one spot and chametz things. And another brisa says that you could pour out the water in an area that has cracks in it, where theoretically the water can collect and gather and ferment things. Ferment itself, I guess, ferment other things, create a whole chametz situation. Lo kasha, the nefisha de kavu, ad lo nefisha de lo kavu. So it depends how much water there is. So if there's a lot of this baker's water, so then spill them out on some kind of slant so that they travel downwards and don't collect in one place. Whereas if it's just a shtickle, so then you can pour them into like some cracky earth thing, even though they'll collect, because there isn't very much to collect in any event. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda, Isha lo salush ela b'mayim shalanu. Aha! Oh yeah, I should have included this in my write-up, right? Mayim shalanu. Who could tell me what mayim shalanu is? The funny thing is, if you're wondering, if you think that it means like mayim shalanu, like our water, guess what? As we're going to see in a second, you're not the only ones who think that. But mayim shalanu means water that has rested. And as Rashi tells us, it means that, Pesach comes at the end of the winter, and apparently during the winter, the world is colder. Okay, I get that. But the spring water, for some reason, I guess in the winter is warmer. I don't know, something to do with the sun. I don't know. It's gonna, I think, come up a little bit later in the Masechta, so maybe we'll get it better then. But apparently then the spring water at the end of the winter is somewhat warm. So what you want to do is you actually want to take out the water the night before, collect the water from the spring the night before, and then you leave it out all night. Probably you have to cover it, because of the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that talks about snakes getting their venom into like water and stuff. Anyways, but you collect the water from the spring the night before or the day before, and overnight the water will stay out so that it can cool down, because if the warm water will cause the dough to ferment too quickly. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Isha lo talush ela b'makom shelanu. So Rav Yehuda says that a woman who's making dough should only use water that rested overnight and cooled down. Darsha Rav Masna b'Paponia. So Rav Masna was teaching this in a place called Paponia. L'machar Aisu kule ama chatzbayu v'asu legabi v'amule havlon maya. So the next day, everybody came to his house with their water containers, and they said, "Okay, give us water." Meaning, because they understood that when Rav Masna said that you have to use mayim shalanu, he thought they meant you have to use our water, shalanu, ours, right? So they thought Rav Masna was saying you have to use our water. So everyone was like, "Oh, okay, that's weird, but fine." So then the next day, everybody was coming over and asking to use their water for their matzahs. So Amrlu, he said to them, "No, ana b'maya debisu amri. No, I didn't mean our water. I meant water that was resting all night. That's what I meant." Taras Rava Ishilo Salush Bechama. It says Rava, a woman should not make matzahs out in the sun because it's warm and it can cause the dough to ferment. V'lo b'chami chama, and not using water that was heated up by the sun for the same reason. V'lo b'mayim agrufin min amolier. If you have some kind of like a hot water kettle, so don't take out water from the bottom of the hot water kettle because it'll be warm. And then she should be working with the bread. I think that's like a thing while you're baking matzahs, to always be moving them around and playing with them, so that she shouldn't remove her hands from the dough, until it's baked. And she needs two vessels, one that has the water that she's going to be basting onto the dough, and the other one that she's going to be cooling down her hands, so that she shouldn't, make sure to keep her hands cool, so that she's not going to be heating up the dough. Interesting. What if she did knead the dough with warm water? Then what happens? So Mazutra Amar Mutter, Ravashi Amar Aser. Mazutra says no, no. So Marzutra says it's taka okay, Seder. She shouldn't have done it. She shouldn't have used warm water, but Seder, if she did, she did. Ravashi Amar Aser. Ravashi says no. Somebody I worked with yesterday said Nightmare City. I think that's what she said. Nightmare City. So that's it. So Ravashi Amar Aser. Ravashi says Nightmare City. So Amar Marzutra says Marzutra Minaminala. How do I know that it's taka okay, that if she kneaded the dough with warm water, it's still acceptable? Titania, as we learned in the Brayso, in Losas and Asoin b'Pesach, well, because we learned the other day that you don't soak barley in water on Pesach, but if you did soak it, nizbaku asur, lo nizbaku mutarin. So look, if they split because they were fermenting, so then that's a problem. But as long as it didn't split, so it's beseder. So you're also, take a look at the bread, at the product that she made. If it looks like matzah, it's matzah. If it looks like chametz, it's chametz. And therefore, even if she kneaded with warm water, it's not an automatic disqualification. Rav Ashi says it's nightmare city. Do we treat them all like the same furrow? I mean, the furrow thing is just like a metaphor, but the point is, we can't treat every situation the same. If specifically we say that it's acceptable, but over here we didn't specifically say it's acceptable, therefore it's nightmare city, right? So therefore, when it comes to the barley soaking in the water, you shouldn't do it. But it explicitly says if you did do it, so then it's acceptable, it's fine. So, but over here we don't have anything to say. We don't have any indication that if she kneaded with warm water, it's still acceptable. Therefore, it's nightmare city, and it doesn't work. You have to throw it in the garbage. Hajjan alach kol shah. So we will come back to you, perek kol shah. Moving on to the third perek of Masechta Pesachim, ve'elu ovrin b'Pesach. These are things that you will be violating the prohibition against eating chametz on Pesach. Kutach habavli. We're going to have to explain what all these things are. But if anybody remembers Daf Kuf Mem Hey of Masechta Shabbos, maybe remember a shtickle about Kutach habavli. That was on the same daf where we talked about Rabbi Abba's famous chicken that everyone thought was extremely disgusting. But people didn't really think Kutach habavli was that much better. But that already got that's already a sensitive subject. Rabbi Yosef would get very insulted if you spoke badly about Kutach habavli. Anyways, v'sheichar amadi, some kind of beer lemaisa, v'chometz adomi, Edomite vinegar, v'zeisum amitzri, Egyptian zaysom, v'zoman shel tzabayim, dyer's zoman, v'amilan shel tabachim, and tabachin's amilam, and v'kolan shel sofrim, and the kolan of sofrim. Don't worry, we'll get to all these things in a few minutes. Rabbi Eliezer Omer af tachshitei nashim. Rabbi Eliezer says even women's jewelry. We'll get there also. This is the rule. Kol shu mimin dagon harei over b'Pesach. This is the general rule. If you have something made out of the 5 grains on Pesach, you have to be careful. If it's chametz, you're going to be in trouble. And the Gemara, the Mishnah clarifies that, by the way, all these things, if you eat them, you violate a lav, you don't get kares, right? So whereas, of course, if you eat bread on Pesach, you chayiv kares, but if you drink beer on Pesach, so it sounds like you're not necessarily chayiv kares, but we will whip you. So if you don't mind that, then, I don't know, arguably, probably still shouldn't drink beer, but whatevs. Says the Gemara, there are 3 things that were said about this Babylonian dip of sorts. It clogs the arteries. It blinds the eyes. And it makes your body weak. So it clogs the arteries because of nisyove de chelva, the curds of milk that are in there. It blinds the eyes because of the salt. And it makes the body weak because of the moldy bread, or the bread that's in there that gets moldy. Now, interestingly, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos and Daf Kuf Mem Hey Amud Bey is actually Rav Yosef was sort of defending the honor of the Kutach habavli by saying that actually they brought some to Eretz Yisrael, and everybody was all the sick people were trying to get their hands on it because it was a very effective remedy, I guess, which is interesting because over here we're basically saying it's like nightmare city, right? It clogs the arteries and all sorts of bad stuff. So interesting. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, I guess ask your doctor if you should be eating Kutach habavli. There are 3 things, marben as a zevel. They increase the excrement, I guess, and they make you bend over. And they take away 1/500th of a person's eyesight. And we saw this in Masechta Eruvin. And these are then paskibar, like whole wheat bread, whole grain bread, I guess. V'sheichar chadash, and new beer. V'yerek chai, and raw vegetables. So stay away from those things. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, there are three things, however, that decrease the excrement, and make you stand nice and tall, and they brighten up your eyes. Okay, these sound like nice things. These are them pasnikia, white bread, basar shamin, fatty meat, v'yayin yashan, and old wine. Old wine sounds nice. Pasnikia, the smida, so clean bread is like a fine flour. Basar shamin, the tzvirta delo aftach, so fatty meat of a goat that has never had any children. Yain yashan atik atike, and old wine is like 3-year-old wine. Now, in general, when you have things that, like remedies that are, let's say, good for headaches, so then it might be bad for like heartaches or something that's good for your heart might be bad for your head, something like that, right? There's like give and take. But bar mizangvila retiva, the exceptions being fresh ginger, upilple arichta, long peppers. What are long peppers? Ufas nikia, and like white bread, uvasar shamen, and fatty meat, v'yain yashan, and old wine, demayda l'chule gufa, that they're mamish good for your entire body. Very interesting advice. Zok the Gemara Sheikhar Amadi. So what is this median beer? So very, very interesting. Duramu Beish Saire. So it's beer that has barley in it. Now Rashi points out Sheikhar Amadi, the fisha ba'osan ayamim, in those days eino agin lasos sheikhar elamei tmarim, that in those days the general way to make beer was with dates. Uvumadai osan sheikhar mimesorin kain osan shalanu, but in Madai they would make beer with barley as we do. Karile sheikhar amadi, and therefore we call it the median sheikhar, because the median beer, because at that time only in media, in Madai, that is where they would make barley out of a beer out of with barley. But nowadays, sort of, we generally that's the general beer is barley beer. There is an Indian called wheat beer and all sorts of other beers also, but general beer, epis like a Heineken, is I think barley. Diramu fine. So Diramu be meisari, that they put in like barley. Fine. V'chometza adomi, and Edomite vinegar. The shadu be saire, that it's wine that they like put in like barley juice or something, or barley kernels. Amr of Nachman says, of Nachman Batchila, listen to this. Initially, Yehuda, when they would bring wine for libations in the temple from the area of Israel called Yehuda, isn't that so cool? Like the pasuk says, we're gonna write the pasuk in Vayechi, right? So it says by Yehuda. What does it say? It says, Chachline enayim miyayin ulven shinayim mechalav, right? Osri lagefen iro v'lasareka b'ni asoro, whatever it is. So we see that in Yehuda, mamish, the wine was very good. So now in the times in the Beis Hamikdash, when they would bring wine from the area of Yehuda to the Beis Hamikdash for the libations, so the wine was so good that it just would never turn into vinegar. If you wanted to make vinegar out of it, you would have to add barley in order to make it vinegary. Right, so Batchila initially Shayumavian Nesachim Yehuda, when they would bring wine for libations from Yehuda, the wine in the area of Israel of Yehuda was so geshmak that it wouldn't ferment. It wouldn't turn into it would turn into wine. It wouldn't turn into vinegar. They would have to add barley if they wanted to turn it into vinegar. Also Hametz stam, and that was what was called just regular vinegar, was if you had the wine that you added barley to. The achshav, and nowadays nowadays it's kind of changed, right? Now the in yenim shel adomi machmetz ad shenos in the sochen tzorod v'konos chometz adomi. Right now, but at this point in history, it's not necessarily the wine of Eretz Yisrael that's so geshmak. It's the wine of the Edomites that is very geshmak, that doesn't turn into vinegar unless you add barley to it. But on its own, the wine is so stark that it won't become vinegar. L'kaim mashenemar, and this is to establish what the pasuk says. Imala hachorova, it's a Gemara Megillah as well. In Malaya zo chareva zo v'malaya zo chareva zo. Right? It says that Tzur is going to say that they're going to make themselves rich from the wealth of Jerusalem. That they're going to go and take everything from Jerusalem and become wealthy. So basically, we see that Jerusalem was wealthy, and all their wealth is going to be delivered elsewhere. So we see when this one, right? What do we say? In Malaya zo chareva zo, right? So if this one is full, then that one is empty, is destroyed. V'malaya zo chareva zo, and if this one is full, then it means that the other one is empty. Let's go weiter for a second. Of Nachum bar Yitzchak Amar Mehacher, it says of Nachum bar Yitzchak from here, La'omi Ye'ematz, that each, it says in the context of Yaakov and Esav, that each one will be stronger than the other, meaning that they will never both be strong at the same time, right? When one is up, the other one is down. When that guy is up, then the other one is down. So basically, once upon a time, the wine of Yehuda was very geschmack, that it wouldn't become vinegary on its own. You'd have to have barley, but now that's not the case. And as we're going to see other examples now, but the wine of the Edomites is very geschmack, that it doesn't become vinegar unless you add barley. Tanya, we learn in the Brisa, Amr of Yehuda, says of Yehuda, so in the area of Israel called Yehuda, Barishona initially, if you bought vinegar from an Am Haaretz, so then, right, somebody who's suspect that he doesn't separate Meiser, so Eino Tzarech le'aser, so initially you wouldn't have to separate your own Meiser, Mipnei shechazaka eino ba ela min hatemed, because once upon a time you can assume that the vinegar that you were buying didn't come from wine, because the wine wouldn't turn to vinegar. The mistama, it just came from like adding water to grape pits and things like that, and that's how you would make the vinegar, but it wasn't actually wine. But nowadays, if somebody buys vinegar from an Am Haaretz, well then, tzarech la'aser, then you would need to separate Meiser shechazkaso eino ba ela min hayayin, because you can assume that it's coming from wine, because nowadays the wine isn't as good as it was, and therefore it can become vinegar, and you have to assume that the vinegar that you're buying is actually wine that became vinegar, and therefore the Am Haaretz person who's suspect against taking Meiser, well, you have to assume that he didn't take Meiser from the wine, and therefore you would have to separate your own Meiser. But one second, we just said that, once upon a time, if you bought vinegar, mistama was temed vinegar, and therefore you didn't have to separate your own Meiser. Nowadays, you can assume that the wine that the vinegar is wine vinegar, and therefore you have to separate Meiser. The implication being that according to Rabbi Yehuda, this temed, this like fermented thing that you make from just like adding water to like grape pits and peels and like lees, whatever. So that implies that you wouldn't have to separate Meiser from that, and therefore if you buy it from an Am Haaretz, you don't have to separate your Meiser because mistam is just temed. So v'atanam, we learn in the Mishnah, misamed, somebody who's making this temed, v'nosan mayim b'mida, and you put in a certain amount of water, umatza kedei midaso, and then when he finds it later, it's the same amount of water, i.e., no like significant fermentation happened. So potter, so you don't have to separate any Meiser. For Rabbi Yehuda says you have to separate Meiser nonetheless. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to temed, you do have to separate Meiser. So how come we're saying that once upon a time, if you would buy temed from an Am Haaretz, or if you would buy vinegar from an Am Haaretz, since you can assume that it's temed, therefore you didn't have to separate Meiser, but Rabbi Yehuda says you have to separate Meiser from temed anyway. So what's going on? So Achikamer, this is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Lo nechshedu Am Haaretz ala temed. You could say, yeah, in a chinami, you do have to separate Meiser from temed. However, the Am Haaretz doesn't really care, right? Just like the Am Haaretz isn't suspect against Truma, you can assume they separated Truma because it's only 2% anyways. It's the Meiser that's like 10% that were suspicious that he didn't separate because that's more significant. But things that it's not such a big deal, he doesn't really care, he'll separate anyway. So by temed, because it's just water and grape pits and stuff, so he has no problem separating Meiser. So therefore they're just not suspect when it comes to temed. And anyways, as Rava said in Masechta Shabbos, and we've seen other times as well, that Rov Amei Haaretz masvinin, that most Amei Haaretz separate Meiser anyways. So especially when it comes to temed, you can assume that they already separated the Meiser. Ibai Seymour, I can give you a different reason. Nechshadu. No, really, you do have to be concerned that maybe the Amarites didn't separate Meiser from the Temed. V'lokasha, it's no problem. Depends how the Temed was made. If it was made with just like pits and stuff, so then Beseder, then you don't have to be concerned that they separated it. But if it's made with wait 1 second. Oh no, sorry. What it means is that if it's made out of like great pits, so then it's just pashut, not chayiv and meiser, because it's just like water and pitty, grapey stuff, but it's not really chayiv and meiser. But if it's made with like actual wine byproducts and like grape peels and what's it called? The shmarim, the residue or whatever, like I think it's called lees, like Lees, I think. Dennis, what do you have to say? But I guess if it's like a more significant winey presence, so then you would have to separate your own meiser. So it just depends how you make this temed. V'zeisum mitzri. Oh, and if you have zeisum mitzri, was is das zeisum mitzri? You could tell me. My zeisum mitzri. What is a zeisum mitzri? Tani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says tilsa saire. It's 1/3 barley. Tilsa kortme. 1/3 saffron. V'tilta milcha and 1/3 salt. Rav Papa mapik saire u'ma'ayil chite. Rav Papa swaps out barley for wheat. V'simanech sisne. And if you want to remember who says what, just remember that Rav Yosef says sare, which is barley. There you go. That the samach and the sin. That's how you remember. So Rav Yosef who says barley, and Rav Papa says wheat. Tarlu, they would soak these ingredients. V'kalulu, they would roast the ingredients. V'tachnelu, and they would grind these ingredients. V'shasulu midivcha v'aratzarta, and they would drink it from Pesach until Shavuos. To come at Marpele, if you were constipated, it would soften things up with the Rafi, and if things were shtickle too soft, Mekametle, it would firm things up. So if you were a little runny, it would fix diarrhea, and it would also fix constipation. Wow, a miracle elixir. L'cholav l'isha ubra sakanta. However, for somebody who's sick, or for a pregnant woman, it was dangerous. But isn't constipation and diarrhea like kind of being sick? So like, wouldn't you only drink this miracle elixir if you're sick anyways? V'zoman shel tzabayim, and also zoman shel tzabayim. What's that? Hacha targimu. So they explain over here that it means maya dechivrei titzabe laba. So it is like you soak bran and you use it to paint red hides. So don't eat that stuff on Pesach, or ever, arguably. V'amilan shel tabachim. What's that? Pas tvua. So shalohevia shlish. So if you make bread out of grain that is not yet 1/3 of its ripeness, shamanicha pikeder v'shuevez azuma, you put it on top of like a pot, and it absorbs whatever, I don't know, not good stuff is coming from the pot, I guess, like bad steams and stuff. All right. V'kolan shel sofrim. What's that? Hachatarguma perura de ushkefe. It's glue of shoemakers. Okay. Rav Shimi Mechozna Amar, but Rav Shimi Mechozna says zetipulan shabnos ashirim, that this is actually what the daughters of the wealthy would use to remove hair from their body. Shemashiris also livnos aniyim, and they would leave it for the poor people. Like whatever was left over, they would leave it for the daughters of the poor people, and it was made with like flour, as we're going to see in a minute. Oh, well, I guess I just decided that I guess we're going to continue and do that part. I wasn't sure if I was going to stop before that part or not. Well, since I promised, I guess that we'll see in a minute, so I guess we'll have to do it. So, Ini, is this really true that this Kolan Shel Sofrim is like what the wealthy daughters would, or the daughters of the wealthy would use to remove hair? That in our Mishnah we're listing 4 types of things that are relevant for everybody, and 3 things that are specific to particular crafts. But if you say that this is like what the daughters of the wealthy would use to remove hair, well then what does that have to do with a craft Like, that's not a craft, that's just shaykh to like everybody. Ve'elamai peru de ushkefe. So rather, what is this? Kolon shel taba shel sofrim. It must be the glue of the shoemakers. Amai karile hi kolon shel sofrim kolon shel ratzonim ibayile. But then why are we calling it the glue of the writers, of the scribes? We should call it the glue of the shoemakers, if that's what it is after all. Amr v'shai le'olam peru de ushkefe. So says Rav Shai, no, really it is the glue of the shoemakers. My kari le kolon shel sofrim. So why are we calling it the glue of the scribes, the sofrim? Nami medabkin bu nirosein. Well, the scribes also use this glue in order to connect their papers. So we call it that. All right. What kind of glue do you like to use? Weiter. Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer, af tachshite nashim. Says Rabbi Eliezer, even the jewelry of women. Tachshite nashim sakadaitech. Do you really think it means the jewelry of women? Why would the jewelry of women be chametz? So ela ema af tipule nashim. No, so rather it means even the treatment of women. To Amar of Yehuda, Amarav, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Benos Yisrael, shegiu lepirkan v'leigiu l'shanim. If you have Jewish girls who have reached puberty, but they're not yet 12. So, aniyim tof, and they want to remove their body hair, although I don't see why it has to do with specifically being that age, but beseder, aniyim tovlos osen besid. So, if they are daughters of poor, if they are poor, if they don't have so much money, so then tovlos osen besid, so they use lime to remove their hair. Benos ashirim tovlos osen besoles, the daughters of wealthy people, so then they remove their hair with fine flour. Benos melachim b'shem amor, the daughters of kings, they use oil of myrrh. Shenemar, as the pasuk says by Esther, Queen Esther says, Shisha chodashim b'shem amor, that for 6 months she soaked herself in myrrh oil. Okay. My shemen amor. What is myrrh oil? Rav Huna bar Yirmiyah Omer Satkas, says Rav Huna bar Yirmiyah that it's Satkas, and as Rashi explains, he doesn't know what it is. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Omer shemen zayis shlevi shlish. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says that it is olive oil from olives that have not yet reached a third of their ripeness. Tanya, we learn a brayso. Rav Yehuda Omer says Rav Yehuda on pikanin shemen zayis shlevi shlish, that on pikanin is olive oil that has not yet reached a third of its ripeness. Also, how come you use it? Because it removes hair and it makes the flesh geschmack. Okay, so let us do a shtickle review. We discussed, don't eat roasted korban pesach before Yom Tov. Right, we said that it's a prohibition to eat korban pesach that is roasted before Pesach begins. We said that it learns out because it says lemor lav amor, which means the prohibition. We discussed maim shalanu, that you make when you're making matzahs, you use water that rested overnight. We began a new perek, and we discussed all sorts of things of chametz that are not allowed. As we're going to see in tomorrow's daf, these were all like mixtures of sorts, or not your standard kind of like regular bread kind of chametz. These are all like, mixtures of beer, things like that, where you can't necessarily see them, or used in non-traditional ways, like to remove hair. And we say that the Mishnah says that it's just a prohibition. We whip you, but you don't get kares. Chevra, cheers.